Hello everyone and welcome to the podcast. My name is Nick Dove and this is the Afterlife Pod. Today I have got an experience from ndurf.org and the person having the experience is called Natalie B, and this is not a near-death experience today. It is a spiritually transformative experience, or STE. Let's go then. I had a bone marrow transplant on November the 21st, 2014. I was released from the hospital in December and spent my recovery alone in my apartment in California. Recovery was a lonely, isolating, anxiety-filled experience, as I had never been through a health crisis before and was young with not much support. I don't remember the exact date because I did not share this story fearing that I would be labelled crazy. However, I know it was near the time Murrieta received snowfall, which was not common for the area, placing this around December 2014 to January 2015. In the few days leading up to the experience, I was having a sensation that it felt like I would close my eyes. That felt like if I would close my eyes, I would not be able to wake up again. I could not identify why I was feeling that way. I had no fever, no rash, no headache. I communicated my concern to my mum, but she wasn't worried. I was doing everything right with managing recovery and medications that we knew of. Feeling sick, tired, hopeless, lonely, worthless, worried about my finances and the future, I started calling out to God for help, making pleading deals such as, "If you show me that you are with me, I promise I surrender my will for yours." Or, "If you pull me out of this mess, I will dedicate my life to you." That sort of thing. I really felt that I had no future, no purpose, and that my body would never function properly again. I now understand that the enemy found an open door. I considered suicide and even began considering which prescription I could abuse to end my life. I googled different prescriptions for a while, then laid in my bed crying over my emotions and pleading to God for intervention until I fell asleep. I slept for some time and was woken up after midnight. I remember it was the hour of 2 a.m. by some strange sounds. The atmosphere changed within my apartment. My blinds lifted and suctioned up against the glass windows. It was darker outside, but there was a white glow filling my apartment through the blinds. My 3 pet cats began to speak, and they gathered in my room from where they had been sleeping and shouted praises to the Lord. A sweet smell filled my senses. All these things defied science, and I knew something special was happening. I began travelling upward, and it was no longer night, but I was in a blue sky. I looked down and had a vision of trees and mountains bowing down. I looked up and saw the Son of God descending. I said to the other people down on the ground in my vision, "Do you see him? I knew he would come." But the many people around me in the vision did not look up and see him. I was then seated at a large round wooden table. It was a banquet table. I was there with several other guests, all dressed in a white glow. I didn't recognize the guests, but there were approximately 12, and made me feel overwhelmingly glad to be sitting with them and very welcomed. We ate and we laughed. We laughed not at anyone's expense, but because we were joy-filled and happy, real happiness. The speed at which everyone conversed was otherworldly. There weren't so much words exchanged, but ideas conveyed through quick images and numbers. We played a mental telepathic numbers sort of game. I don't have the exact words to describe it, but the joy and fun that it brought to me felt much like playing a card game with good company, the company you love the most. After our banquet and game, I walked with the Lord. I knew it was Him because His light was the brightest and warmest, and I felt so settled in His presence, just overwhelmed by comfort, joy, peace, and love. Even with very little words spoken, all these emotions were felt. It was a relief of pain. I was introduced to a boy with blonde hair and blue eyes. I had the feeling that that boy might be a family member, but wasn't sure how we were related. I considered if he belonged to my sister because she has blue eyes too. I was overwhelmed with a sense of love and belonging. My cheeks were hurting from all my smiling, which reminded me that I was not truly in heaven, but still in my earthly body. I was returned from the vision and was given a renewed sense of hope and joy. I did not want to leave. Heaven felt like home, and I had no desire to see my earthly home again. Back in my bed, I watched the light of the Holy Spirit drain out of my bedroom through the blinds. Tears of gratitude burst out of my eyes. I was deeply touched that this sort of gift could happen to me, a deeply flawed and ungrateful sinner. I jumped out of bed and cried praises of thankfulness, worship, and watched as the white light drained out of my apartment windows and the atmosphere returned to normal. I felt alive again, like a new creation, truly reborn and filled with the joy in the Lord. Earlier that evening, I was deep in the lowest, most broken moment of my life, and suddenly I had experienced the happiest and most healing moment of my life. Believing that I had experienced a touch of heaven, I immediately called two of my family members to explain the good news. I think I was only able to get a hold of my mother, who said something like, "Nat, you probably confused your prescriptions and are hallucinating. If you are fine, go back to bed." I did check my medicines, and nothing seemed out of place. To me, it doesn't matter if that were true anyway, or if it was just a dream. The vision saved me from suicide that night, ignited my faith, and gave me a hunger for scripture. I wanted to know more about that banquet table. I fell back asleep towards the morning hours with the biggest smile on my face that I'd ever had and the best rest I'd ever experienced. The days after, I began a new life. It is interesting that I had just been reborn through a bone marrow transplant. That is what the physicians called the transplant day, a rebirth day. I needed new blood to survive, but it is really by the blood of Jesus that I am healed. I felt like God, in a way, anointed my new blood and encouraged me to live a new life inside and out. I became hungry to know more about that banquet table and dove into scripture, Bible journaling, and searching for scriptures that match my description of heavenly realms. I have found many, thanks be to God. I became a foster mum in January 2019 to a little boy with blonde hair and blue eyes. I was able to adopt this little blessing in February 2021, and he was named John Luke. And that's the end of that little experience. So like I said at the beginning, this wasn't a near-death experience. There was no close brush with death. It's simply someone having a strong desire, I guess, to get to know God a little bit better. And in this case, God actually reveals himself or herself. It's neither. God is neither neither male or female. As I believe anyway. I think it's just religion that has given God a gender, and I don't personally agree with that being done, because it just, especially nowadays in modern times where people are, more reluctant to reveal their gender and to identify with one, and to put God into a particular category sounds a little bit stupid in modern times. And I think some of the churches are starting to become a little bit more aware of that, and becoming a little bit more open to the idea of God becoming a genderless figure. That's just my personal experience, or thought process. Some people love calling God Father and referring to as him as a he, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the way they see it, and that's fair enough. But just from my personal experience, God, for me, does not, have any human qualities at all, let alone gender. So, I guess the closest thing is it just gives you love. So, and that's probably the best thing I can to describe what God is to me is just love. It's not a parental thing, or an authority figure or anything like that. It's just there, and I know it's there, and I don't know how else I can really describe that. But um, I guess, yeah, when I say that out loud, I might track a little and say, yeah, I guess that could be seen as a little bit of a parental type thing. But yeah, I wouldn't say mother or father. I'd just say more of a source, I guess. And that's the way I see it anyway. And everyone's going to have their own unique take on God and their relationship to it. But yeah, and I don't think there's any right way or wrong way of connecting to the universe. It's just happens. I'm just lucky enough to have happened to me. So there's not much really to go through in this one. It was pretty straightforward. It was nice and easy to read. I actually read it and understood it all as I was going through, which for me is not always the case. Sometimes I have to go through it a second time to really understand what the words said. I don't know, maybe there's something wrong with the way I read, and my mind doesn't take it in the first time, or maybe that's just normal. I don't know, or maybe I just at times lose concentration in what I'm actually reading. But yeah, this one was nice and simple, nice and easy to understand. So yeah, I'll just skim through it, see if I can pick anything up the second time through. So this guy's feeling, depressed, suicidal, because he is about to have an operation, a bone marrow transplant, and oh no, it's a woman. Sorry, this lady, and this is causing him or her a lot of grief. So she does what a lot of people do. She calls out to God, says, God, please help me. I don't think I can do this. And if you do, she does a deal with God, which I'm sure many of us have done. Probably some of you listening have done this to God. Do this for me and I'll do this for you. In this case, this lady says, if you show me that you are there, that you are with me, I promise I surrender my will for your will. And she also says, if you pull me out of this mess, I will dedicate my life to you. I'm sure lots of people have done that and haven't had God reveal God's self to them at all, or it's just like, I guess, when you say a prayer and you don't get that prayer answered, I don't understand why some people have this have their prayers answered and others don't, and others get a really excellent experience of what God is and have God really enter their lives in a big way. And why this happens, I don't know. I've heard a couple of theories from near-death experiences that this happens because, I guess one of them is that the life we're all living now has all been organized, and us as spirits or souls before we came down here have said, if this, if this happens in my life at a certain point of time, because it becomes too hard, life becomes too hard, I want you, God, to come into my life. So some people who have these near-death experiences say that we make a deal with God before we come down here to get a bit of an intervention and a bit of proof of God at some point in our lives, if our lives take a certain direction. And that makes sense, I guess. But then I think, okay, if that's true, how can we have our own free will if we're planning our lives before we come here? Like what is this free will that we feel that we have all an illusion, or is it really, really there, or is the free will more from the soul's perspective rather than the humans? And it just gets a little bit confusing for me how. I guess I've just explained that in a pretty terrible way, but what I'm trying to figure out, just to repeat myself, is why certain people get these incredibly transformative spiritual experiences, others don't. Others get their prayers answered, others don't. And others see miracles on a regular basis, others don't. I'm just curious as to how that happens, and if our lives are planned before we come down here, what's the point of doing things like prayers if it's all planned out before we come? Why do people pray? But some people swear on praying and saying it works, and others, like myself, are a little bit skeptical. I'm becoming a little bit more convinced as time goes by that praying does actually do something, but I don't know. It's confusing, isn't it? And I guess it just comes down to having faith, having belief, just reminding yourself on a regular basis that you are more than this body, you are the soul inside this body, and you are connected to something much bigger than yourself that hears you when you talk to it. And although you might not get a response, it is there. And I know for a fact that it's there. I interact with it on a daily basis, and I say it because it's hard to put a word on it. You put a word like God on it, and people's minds will very quickly jump to a conclusion that, for me, I had pictures in my head of what God was like before all this stuff had happened. I was an atheist. I didn't believe in God before my spiritually transformative experience, but because of my conditioning and upbringing, I thought that God was probably like this human-like figure in the sky that's got angry if you did the wrong thing, and that was my picture of God in my head anyway. And my experience with what I think is now God is totally different. It's got no human qualities. It's there more of a guiding influence than anything. But I've only just sort of touched the surface, I think, on what God is, and I'm pretty new to all this. So as the years go by, I'm sure God will reveal more of God's self to me, and I will hopefully, get a lot of these questions I have answered. Like, why do some people get spiritual interventions and others don't? That would be one of the first questions I would ask God, I think, because there's a lot about this life that doesn't seem fair, and that's just one of them. But there's a whole heap of them. Like, we all know that life is not a balanced thing for humans. I was watching some news article the other day. I try to avoid the news, but I was at work. The people, the residents in the aged care facility often have a TV on, so I just caught the news, and there was, as per usual on the news, clips of war and people living in countries that, had less economic opportunities than the one I live in Australia, and just all this negative stuff. And yeah, it did send two things to me. Number one, it made me more grateful for being where I am and having all this stuff at my fingertips, like education, technology, safety, opportunity to get ahead on a financial basis, all these things. And although they won't ultimately give you happiness, it's just good to know that you have those opportunities there, and if you want to go down those paths, then they're there to go down. Whereas other people are lucky to survive the day, or to get a meal for that day, or to drink some clean water that day. And yeah, it just when you catch a little bit of the news, you get reminded of things like that. And it was heartbreaking, but it was also made me have a little bit more gratitude for the position that this little me who's talking to you now has. And it just made me question life and God, and the whole system, and why the earth is like this, and why, if we do really choose to come down into certain situations and bodies and cultures and countries before we come and get to choose our parents and all that sort of thing, like a lot of people who have a near-death experience say we get to do, why would people intentionally go to places that are going to be prone to violence and poverty and suffering, and obviously living in a Western country, and living a comparatively privileged existence. It's not all smooth sailing, but compared to what some people do, the challenges I face on a daily basis aren't anywhere near as significant as some people. So it puts it all into perspective when you get reminded that there are others not as well off as you, and like I said, that's a double-edged sword for me, because it makes me more grateful, but I also feel their pain and suffering too. So and I guess I was just talking about that because I was trying to understand why God intervened in some lives and not others, and just how this whole place works in general. I guess it doesn't seem to make sense from just a little individual's human point of view, but the more you research this topic, the more you begin to, or you get taught that looking at this planet through your earthly eyes is not going to give you the answers, and you're not going to be able to make sense of it, because you need to see it from the bigger picture, from the soul's point of view, from God's point of view. And maybe when you are looking at the earth from outer space and being able to see the whole complete picture, it might it should make a lot more sense than it does for you and me running around on this planet for this limited amount of time that we're here. So this experience, it's not a near-death experience. She's just, about to have some major medical procedures, and she is upset and suicidal, and she calls out to God, and in this case, God gives her a pretty prompt response. She calls out, and literally that later that night, as she's going to bed, the whole room she's in starts slowly filtering with more light, and it's pitch black outside, and there's no lights on in her room, but slowly the room becomes filled with this glowing light. And the next thing that happens that is inexplicable is her 3 pet cats begin to speak. She doesn't go into what they actually say, but she says they're saying, they're singing their praises to the Lord, and doesn't actually mention the words used, but this is what she's experiencing, a light coming from nowhere, and her cat's beginning to communicate. And then the next thing she notices is her smells. She starts to smell this beautiful aroma in her room. So there's 3 pretty incredible things right there, but it continues. She knows these things can defy science, and she realizes, okay, something otherworldly is happening here. This is all real. I'm really experiencing it. It's not a dream. I'm really getting a treat, I think, here. And as she says this, she begins to travel upwards. And it's no longer light. She goes so far up, but she's just in this blue sky. And I guess that's like she's just entered another dimension, because she was previously a moment ago in bed in darkness, and then starts rising out of her body and finds herself in a blue sky-like environment. And then she looks down and she sees trees and mountains, and then she says she sees the Son of God descending, and she can see other people around her. And I don't know what this line means, but she says to these other people, do you see him? Do you see Jesus? I knew he would come. But then these people she's talking to do not look around and try to look for him, and therefore don't see him. I'm just wondering if this is a little bit of a clue for us on earth, if we're not looking for God, if we're not looking for this magical presence, if we're not looking for figures like Jesus, if we're not believing in them, they're not going to appear. Like, a lot of people say God is hiding in plain sight, and I guess that's a little bit as well what it's like for me. It's like everyday things happening, but they take on an added dimensional meaning, and it's like this experience is communicating to me in a way that goes beyond what it looks like to the human eye, and has an added dimension or depth and connection to me now. And it's like it's speaking to me. Certain things will happen, and it's like if, a few years ago before my spiritual awakening, these things happened, it would have just looked like a few odd events and no added meaning to that. And now things will happen, and it's like it's almost magical and miraculous. And I think this is what this line here is saying. You've got to believe what your intuition is telling you. When something, it might be amazing, it might be just run-of-the-mill, happens to you in your daily life, but something profound seems to be occurring within you. Maybe we should just take a little bit more notice in that, and not chalk it down to it being God or Jesus or anything in particular, although, it can't hurt doing that. But labeling it is going to pigeonhole it, and it's probably best just to accept that that's the profound experience, and to maybe chalk it down to something more than what you're experiencing in the physical realm, and perhaps it's some intervention from a higher power, whatever you want to call it, connection to the universe. There's a lot of words to describing God and what that is, and how people experience it. It's going to be different for everyone. I'm just trying to interpret what I'm reading from this experience here, and spin it into or not spin it, but relate it to my own experience, because that's all I can do, and try to see if that is matching up. So Jesus comes down, she's in this unusual dimension, and they go, and then she says her and about 12 other people go and sit around a banquet table, and there's all the guests are dressed in a white glow, she says, not a dress or a robe, it's a white glow. So I don't know what that looks like. You can use your own imagination as to what a light glow is. But as I'm reading this experience again, I'm sort of picturing that table where, what's it, the Last Supper or something, and they're all wearing those, those the clothes they did from that time, which was, like a sort of monk's clothes, and I'm just sort of picturing these guests in a similar situation, although it doesn't actually say that this experience was happening a long time ago, or from people from a long time ago. She doesn't go into any detail as to what these 12 people actually look like, or what time they were from. She just says 1 minute she's with Jesus, and the next there's 12 people sitting around a big table, and they're all eating, and she feels very accepted, and there's just a general vibe of joy and happiness around this situation. And she discusses, which this part's a little bit NDE like, the way they communicate. She says they're not talking, there's no words exchanged, it's more ideas going back and forth, and these ideas are communicated, I guess, through imagery, and not spoken at all. So it's almost like a mental telepathic way of communicating, which is a very common description of the way one talks to another in this other realm, which, although, like I said, it isn't a near-death experience, it's got a few qualities which are similar, like, this connection to God, this feeling of love and joy, and this spiritual way of communicating. The meal finishes, she starts to walk with God, and it's, like everyone says, it's the brightest, the warmest, the most peaceful feeling they can ever imagine. It's just heavenly, and and she goes on to say that there's no words spoken with the light, or the Lord, or the God, or love. It's just done through emotions, and during this time, she's not feeling any pain, and she's introduced to a little boy with blue eyes and blonde hair, and she can't quite figure out who this kid is. But later on in this experience, we see that this boy ends up being, I think, although she doesn't draw that thread, it's I guess implied that this little boy she sees during this experience ends up being the boy she adopts as time goes by. But while she's with God, she's just overwhelmed by the sense of love and belonging. And I'm sorry if I don't do this justice by the way I talk or describe it. This is just words on a screen for me, and I read these experiences so often. It just sort of it almost becomes a little bit ho hum. So I'm not really giving it the justification or the passion I should be when I'm reading this out. But obviously this experience is giving this person just this incredible relief, and they're just feeling so peaceful and relief, because she's finally being exposed to what really is, that she's been shown that this dimension isn't everything, and there is a God, and God is loving her, and she's loving God back, and this is obviously just giving her a break from the real world at the same time. So it's an incredible experience for people, and sorry, I should really be singing this out or something, but I don't know. I hope you get the gist. It's if you've listened to enough of these experiences, you say, okay, a sense of love and belonging, connectedness, all that, and it becomes a little bit ho hum. Well, it does for me, because I've done so many of these now. But yeah, I think it's worth just pausing and remembering, or really trying to put yourself in this person's position and to try to imagine what it is like, and and, and just understand that this is a life-changing event. So she continues on. She says, "My cheeks were hurting from all the smiling, which reminded me I was not truly in heaven, but still in her earthly body." I guess she says that because she's still feeling a bit of pain, even though it is pain from a supposedly good source, which is her smiling and the muscles beginning to tighten up a bit. And yeah, she uh, uses this little bit of pain as a reminder that she's not fully in heaven yet. She's still partly, at least, in an earthly body, even though she is having this out of body type experience. She is reminded that she probably has to go home at some point in time. Even though this is not what she wants to do, the next thing she knows after acknowledging this pain from too much smiling is waking up in her bed again. So she doesn't get a choice of whether she wants to leave this experience or not. I guess maybe because it's just an out of body experience and she's not on the brink of death. Even still, it's a pretty remarkable little thing to happen to someone, and gives us all hope that we can have a little intervention like this. And just, I don't know, through asking God, I guess it's happened to her, so why can't it happen to you or me? So when she wakes up, she's crying these tears of gratitude and just, really grateful for what has happened to her. She acknowledges she's deeply flawed and a sinner, and she feels unworthy of having this experience. But like I just said, we're all human, and I didn't just say that. I mean, we all could have one of these experiences at any point in time. It's not just going to happen to someone because they're, really spiritual or supposedly good in inverted commas. It can happen to anyone. And as she starts crying, this light slowly starts fading, and the darkness creeps back in, and the atmosphere goes from multi-dimensional back to three-dimensional, and it's the end of her experience, and this connection with God in this extreme way. But she manages to. I'm just flicking through. So yeah, she doesn't really go into much detail as to how this has affected her life or what path it took her down, but she ends up adopting this little boy with blonde hair and blue eyes, and I guess because this experience is pretty new, it's only happened 7, 8 years ago, so it'll be interesting to. But that's still a fair amount of time. I'd like to know how this has changed this lady's life, and a few more detail as to if she, still maintains this connection and what that connection to God looks like. And it doesn't even really talk about what religion she is, or it does have a very Christian sort of feel to it, but she doesn't say. And just give me 30 seconds to flick through some of these questions and answers at the end, and I'll see if there's anything interesting to read out. Okay, well, here's a question that's just answered what I was thinking. Is there any about the religion? And the question is, did you experience and include features consistent with your earthly beliefs? Content that was entirely not consistent with the beliefs you had at the time of your experience. I had always pictured God as the big man in the sky with a white beard, but he was not. He was glory-filled light. I could walk and talk and hold his hand, but it wasn't a human body. I had no idea about the banquet table or wedding parable or the bridesmaid's parable or twinkling of an eye or resurrected bodies, revelation. I couldn't name all the 12 disciples. I had no idea about lampstands, saints, or any real foundation of Scripture. So now I read Scripture, my experience makes so much sense. So I guess this just answers the question I was asking. Did she take a religious path from there? And she says she's reading the Scriptures, and I think that said that in the experience too. So that answers that question. Yes, she sounds like she is a fairly religious woman now. And then the next question is, did you have a change in your values and beliefs because of your experience? And she says, yes, I thought the Bible was an old history book, but then I believed that it was a living, breathing sword, and I needed to start opening to it to understand what I saw in heaven. I needed to start opening it more to get intimate with God. You can experience a touch of heaven when you open the Word. People often say this, don't they, that the Bible for them is their way of connecting to God, and now I can sort of understand what people mean by that. A few years ago, I would have thought, what are these people on about? And for me, it's not the Bible that gives me that connection. It's just so many things in everyday life. Reading these experiences, for one. So give the Bible a try if that works for you, if you're looking for that connection, or don't if you're not. Just stick to listening to the odd NDE. I don't know. If you want to find that connection and you've never tried the Bible, give it a go. What harm can it do? It's a good way to potentially trigger any spiritually transformative experience. It's worked obviously for a lot of other people in the past. So if you are craving that and you want that connection and you want to know more about God, why not give it a go? Or listen to a podcast, or you can listen to the Bible being read word for word on YouTube, free. So, there's no excuse. You can't say, I'm not a good reader. If you want that connection with God, and all you have to do is lie there and listen to it for 10 minutes each night and see if it's working, and, give it a go. And if not, try something else. There's plenty of vehicles out there to get connected. But yeah, for me, the Bible hasn't done much. I'm listening to a podcast at the moment, actually. I started it a few months ago, and yeah, slowly but surely getting through it. It's just a 20 or 10-minute one in each episode, and they just read, I don't know, a verse or a chapter or a book or whatever the Bible calls each little segment each day. And yeah, I'm still in the Old Testament, which is a struggle. It's very old school. God has a preference as to which country of men and women God would prefer to do better, and that just doesn't gel with me and my beliefs. So yeah, I'm just committed to doing it though, and seeing if I can get anything out of it. But I think as it goes by and it becomes a little bit more modern, you get Jesus and these more modern, well, not modern, but newer. The New Testament will probably give me a little bit more connection. But yeah, we'll see, and if it does, I'll report it back to you. And here we go. And here we go. Here's a Q&A with a little bit of her life after this experience. The question is, what life changes occurred in your life after your experience? Large changes in my life. I was married about a year from the trip to heaven and found out early in the marriage that my husband had addiction problems. He calls me his ticket to salvation, but I know that it is God is working through me to help him overcome the disease of addiction. We adopted 3 children from foster care. This was hard. Marriage is a hard task. He has a porn and sex addiction. God had a purpose for me and plans that are not done. That is why I couldn't stay with him. I have been through some difficult times, but have not gone back to that dark suicide place that I had once visited. So, wow. So she married this guy who has porn and sex addiction and adopts 3 kids with him and then leaves him. So, yeah, that's, I don't have any kids, so I don't know how tough that would be, but I was in a family with 3 kids, and my parents were excellent, but they struggled at times, and I couldn't imagine what it would be like as a single parent. But then I think back to some of these residents in my aged care, and they're from huge families, like 10 plus, some of them. And I think, well, if they managed, I guess 3 kids isn't all that hard, but still, I don't know, all those people who are parents who are listening, good on you. I take my hat off to you. It's not an easy job, and yeah, I wish you all the best on that journey. But yeah, I quite liked that experience. It was short and sweet, and yeah, it doesn't have to always be a long one that is profound. I quite enjoyed the simple nature of that one. It was a really pleasant one to read and to discuss. So yeah, let's take a minute off to meditate or reflect or ask God into your life, whatever it is. Just thank you for listening to this episode. I'm just thinking, how confusing this life can be when you overanalyze it and you look at all the religions and all the different faiths out there and all the different interpretations on what God is. And at the end of the day, if you start, listening too much to what other people say you are and what God is and what this whole life is, you're going to get confused because everyone's got their own opinion and they're all going to be slightly different. And sometimes it gets a little bit frustrating for me reading these experiences because I just want all the answers and I want them now and I want to know why everyone has these different experiences and these different understandings of what the universe is and what God is, but there seems to be a few uniform, consistent things like God is light. Um, there's the universe is made of what we as a human would call love. Love is an energy. Um, yeah, but that's about all really, and well, all I can think of now. There's probably a lot more, but off the top of my head, that's all I can come up with. So yeah, if you just remember that God, the universe, the creator, the source is love, and so are you. That's probably the best I can give you right now. But yeah, what I really wanted to say was just your experience is going to be the true teacher of what you are at your core and what this universe is behind the physical facade and behind all your egoic dramas and the dramas of your everyday life, and there's another depth and another dimension to who you are and to what this universe is. And for whatever reason, that's not easy for everyone to see. It's hidden away there, but it is out there. And like I said, I'm lucky enough to get to experience this on a daily basis. And I just want you to know that you can do that too. So, just keep trying and see what happens. And keep listening. And thank you for listening. And thank you for uh, sharing 60 minutes of your time with me. And I look forward to you joining me again next week. Love you all. Take care. Talk soon. Bye.